What is up, everybody? My name is Kador, and welcome to my review of Tim Hecker's latest album, Love Streams. Now, if you haven't watched my previous video, the Tim Hecker discography review, I highly recommend you do that before you watch this video. I'll talk about Tim Hecker in more detail in that video than I will in this one. And I just kind of go through his whole discography up to this point, so it provides more context to this album. But just to summarize, Tim Hecker is a kind of ambient, experimental, abstract, glitchy, electronic soundscape producer. His music is very strange, very weird, very abstract, very interesting, and he seems to be heading in that sort of experimental, abstract route even more now as time goes on, and this album is one of his strangest, for sure. Love Streams is very experimental and very sonically diverse. There's a lot of different sounds, a lot of different instruments, and a lot of kind of vocal effects used in just very creative ways which I haven't really seen before. Just vocals being used in very strange ways and being manipulated to fit with the rest of the tracks in very interesting ways. The album is also kind of warm feeling. Feels a little bit more sort of full and dense than something like Virgins. I don't think it's quite as good as Virgins, spoiler alert, but it does feel a little bit more kind of full of sound rather than being sort of bleak and occasionally kind of like hopeless feeling like that album was. This one is a little bit more just kind of lush, I guess. But I'll talk about the album as a whole a little bit more later. Let's just get right into the track listing for right now and just talk about the tracks themselves. So we start with Obsidian Counterpoint. This track just has his kind of average ambient sort of melodic synths, as well as some other sort of synth notes going all over the place. And it also has, I think, like a pan flute or something like that. This sort of flute that happens throughout that gives it a pretty nice effect, pretty cool feeling. And then it also has this really weird kind of percussion thing that comes in at one point that's sort of like a click and then sort of like a whoosh right afterwards. It's just this very strange sound. It's a little bit loud and a little bit sort of, I don't know, it can get a little bit annoying at times, but overall it's fine. It fits pretty well, I think. And also all of these sounds sort of blend together at the end to create this really cool, like, kind of epic cacophonous thing with all these sounds going everywhere, and I'm a fan of that and the way the track ends. Then we get Music of the Air. This track has a lot of sort of buzzy kind of sounding synths that just play this sort of higher pitched melody, and it also has vocals that, as I mentioned before, there's a lot of really cool vocals in here, and these vocals are, I think all the vocals used in this album are kind of like a chorus type thing, but they're very manipulated and kind of glitchy and just kind of going all over the place, and it sounds really cool and it works really well with the rest of the instrumentation, and it's very interesting, very melodic, and very original. Then we have Biji Dream, which is just kind of a short 2-minute track that has these sort of slightly noisy, kind of like shuffling sounds, as best I can describe them, that are interspersed with a more kind of high-pitched sort of, I think it's like a synth pluck sort of sound of some kind, and they're sort of just interspersed and kind of fade in and out of each other. Nothing too remarkable about this track, but it's not bad. Live Leak Instrumental then takes this aforementioned synth pluck from Biji Dream and sort of combines it with the weird percussive sound of Obsidian Counterpoint, as well as adding in a bunch of new sounds and sort of changing the ones that it reuses a little bit, and it just all blends together into a kind of experimental soundscape type thing. It's pretty cool. I guess this reusing of sound also kind of it makes it feel a little bit more, you know, like a whole album. You know, it's kind of reusing parts from previous tracks, so it's feels maybe a little bit more cohesive that way. Then we have Violet Monumental, which is a sort of 2-part track. The first part has these ambient synth pads at first, or maybe they're like maybe an organ or something, I'm not really sure. if it's actually a synth or an organ, but just these kind of, you know, ambient notes that have been processed and stuff. And then vocals come in that are kind of in the style of Music of the Air, with just these very kind of chopped up, weird, kind of all over the place type vocals. And then there's also a kind of rhythmic bass pulse that is like almost a beat, but not really, that comes in as well, just to give it a little bit of structure, I guess. Yeah, this track is very intriguing and intense. It's pretty cool, I like it. And then part 2 of Violet Monumental is a much more melodic and kind of structured track, less abstract and kind of randomized feeling than a lot of the other ones on here. It just has a repetitive melody and everything. Then we have Up Red Bull Creek, which is a much more relaxing, kind of muffled and ambient track than a lot of the other ones on here. It just kind of acts as a nice break after all the very noisy, random, shuffly, intense stuff that's happened on this album so far. This just kind of makes a nice little break, a nice little relaxing thing that you can just kind of not pay super attention to, which makes it not super interesting, but it's also not really boring at all. There's still some interesting stuff going on here occasionally. And then right after that relaxing, ambient, kind of chill track, we get a sudden, really loud, staticky, obnoxious outburst of noise in the next track, Castrati Stack. And not a huge fan of this part. Just the beginning of this track is just super abruptly, just like it just throws all the staticky noise in your face, and it kind of throws you off of any sort of, I don't know, like relaxed or kind of trancey mindset you may have, you know, listening to the album up to this point, and this kind of just breaks it. So I'm not a huge fan of that, but the rest of this track's really cool. It uses more Music of the Air style vocals in a very interesting way to create some nice melodies, some nice kind of ambient synths. It also has other vocals that are used in more of an ambient drone kind of fashion, with just kind of long sweeps of vocals, just kind of chorusy vocals that happen throughout this. So yeah, it's a nice melodic track except for the very beginning. Then the next track, Voice Crack, has a sort of kind of stuttering electric guitar as its main kind of feature that you're supposed to focus on, I guess. There's also some kind of like higher pitched pluck sounds of either another instrument or just a synth, I can't really tell. But yeah, those all just work together pretty well, and then it sort of transitions into very glitchy, kind of going all up and down the scale type vocals that are all chopped up and sort of, they don't even really sound like vocals anymore. They're very strange. And then you also get some more sort of ambient synth vocals on top of that. And this track's really cool, yeah. It's very interesting, and a lot of very interesting sounds here. Nice melodies. It's pretty cool. Then there's sort of an abrupt, not so good transition to Collapse Sanada, which starts out by just kind of having ambient sort of synth work for the most part. Just playing a little kind of simple melody, just one of sort of ambient tracks. And then almost like midway through, a bit past that, it just collapses, I guess, and just sort of abruptly shuts off almost all of the sound, and just very quickly changes the tone of the track, and it ends up turning into, it sort of builds up into a very kind of dissonant and sort of creepy sounding track after this, which is an interesting choice. It's sort of like two very separate tracks put together. So I don't know, it's interesting, it's pretty cool. This is a very unexpected change in the middle of this, but there's nothing really wrong with it. Then there's a very good transition to the last track on this album, Black Phase. And this track starts out with having just kind of minimal, kind of light ambient synths. And then it also has these like drone metal style electric guitars, sort of in the vein of Sun, Zero, parenthesis, yeah, that band. So it sounds like he took a lot of inspiration from them. And also then these vocals come in, these sort of chorusy vocals that just play these three kind of notes, these three chords. And they're very epic, very intense, and sort of unsettling also, sort of chilling. And they just continue for a few minutes. And then they cut off and the track just kind of continues with the light ambient synth work and the drone metal type guitars. And yeah, it just kind of just ends like that. I like this track, it's cool. So yeah, in conclusion, this album feels a little bit disjointed at times, a little bit like abrupt with some of the sounds, and it has some sort of subpar transitions in it. But overall, I mean, you can't say this album doesn't hold your interest throughout the whole thing. It's very interesting, very strange, and there's never a moment in this album where I felt bored at all. I was always very engaged throughout this whole thing. And as I said before, this album feels pretty warm and pretty full. It's just kind of very thick with sound, I guess. Just a lot going on in any given moment of this album. And while I feel like it doesn't tell so much of a kind of story and paint as much of a concise, clear picture as something like Virgins or even like Rave Death 1972 does as an album, this album is still just, as you know, music goes, it's very interesting, very cool, very melodic, and at times pretty intense and interesting and strange, and it's a nice experience. I very much enjoyed listening to this. While I do hope his next album is a little bit more together than this one and sort of makes a little bit more sense, I still think this album is definitely deserving of a listen. I definitely give it my recommendation, and I also give it an 8.5 out of 10. So yeah, that's my review of Tim Hecker's latest album, Love Streams. If you liked it, you can hit the like button, subscribe if you're not already. If I made you go out and listen to Tim Hecker for the first time, how do you like him? What do you think of his music? If you already are a fan of Tim Hecker, then hopefully I did a decent job at reviewing his album. You can leave any kind of suggestions of albums you want me to review in the future. I'm also thinking of doing like a sort of art review series where I look at some like paintings and stuff. That might be interesting. I've never really seen anyone do that before, but I mean, yeah, no promises. But yeah, thanks for watching. See ya.